There's a whole host of issues underneath the broad spectrum of cybersecurity. So I wanted to pick out a few that we see at the center as being hot topics and things to look out for as we go further down the road here. What do we do to protect ourselves? This is really the question. There are so many theories out there, so many ways of approaching this issue. What do we do? And that's really the next step. One of the things that has been focused on is our critical infrastructure in this country. You may all have heard about the President's initiative to strengthen our critical infrastructure, power plants, utilities, transportation networks, things like that. That's where when we talk about critical infrastructure, that's what we mean. And what came out in February was the Cybersecurity Framework, and that's really a great step forward in terms of protecting our critical infrastructure. It's a blueprint for what critical infrastructure organizations and owners can do to improve their cybersecurity, because as we move forward, even our critical infrastructure, even these utilities where we don't necessarily associate them necessarily with cybersecurity, they are becoming more and more connected. They are dependent on networks, and if our networks are compromised, then our critical infrastructure can go down. So this is a serious, serious issue, and the Cybersecurity Framework is definitely a great step forward. To do all this, we want to share our information. We have all these stakeholders involved. We need to share the information about what the threats are, what we can do, and we need to work together. The data breaches is something we hear about every single day. Target obviously was one of the big events, or Neiman Marcus. You'll recall those in the news. We are afraid that our personal identifiable information is being compromised, or there's identity theft going on, or also intellectual property. We have our intellectual property out there in the cloud now, so to speak, and this intellectual property can be stolen by people who want this information. And we actually end up seeing exact replicas of factories over in China, because some of these blueprints that we have here in the United States were stolen and taken over there. And lastly, civil liberties and privacy. That's also something that we hear about every single day. Obviously, if we want to protect our networks, there needs to be some degree of monitoring of those networks. We need to scan for the malware that's causing the harm. But in order to do so, we might have to release some of our private information, or the people who are scanning will be inevitably seeing some of the information that's flowing back and forth. What is the right balance here? What do we need to do? What do we need to do to have security, but also have our privacy and our civil liberties protected? Next slide, please. So the road ahead. Like I said, cybersecurity, the frequency and scope of these cyber attacks are increasing every single day. And really, we can see it in three areas too. Cloud services. How much of our information is now not only stored on our hard drives, but somewhere off on the server somewhere in the cloud, so to speak. If we're using Dropbox or Google Drive, some services like that, the information that we work with, the information that might be secret or that we want to keep secret, is somewhere out there. And how much control do we really have over that information once it's out there? Who has ownership and who has access? We obviously, companies who provide these cloud services, they have user terms of use, but nothing's 100%. Also, healthcare. There's a big push, obviously, to move from the paper records to electronic records, and that's a great development, because it creates a lot of efficiency, a lot of safety mechanisms are put into place that way. But again, once our records, our private personal healthcare records, are stored somewhere in a server on a cloud, who has access? Does our privacy remain? Here in Washington, D.C., we have a lot of VIPs. If they go to the hospital to get treated, only their doctors, only the healthcare providers that are treating them should have access to these records. Yet, we can see the danger of other people in the hospital, other healthcare providers who have access to the record system, potentially looking up that VIP and seeing, oh, what are they here for? What's going on with them? And then all of a sudden you have this private information disseminated. And we certainly don't want that. Lastly, the Internet of Things. You might have heard this phrase. Things are becoming more and more connected. The gadgets that we work with every single day are the things that we have in our house, like Our thermostats, our refrigerators, all of a sudden, they're now connected to the internet. What does that mean? Well, it means greater vulnerabilities. These devices can actually end up being used in some sort of cyber attack. And if those devices actually store some information about you or your habits at your home, that information can now be accessible to someone else as well and is vulnerable. So these are some areas where we see some issues with cybersecurity and data breaches in general. Obviously, we want to develop a standard of care. That's a big issue. We know that there's these threats out there, but what are the companies and the organizations, what are they supposed to do? Well, we don't really know because we don't really have a baseline standard yet. That needs to be developed. What are the data breach notification rules? Like in the case of Target or Neiman Marcus, their data was breached. Our data as consumers was breached, but we didn't find out about it until months later. Is that okay? And then we get 1 year free credit monitoring. Is that enough? Is that sufficient? I don't know. These are issues that we need to think about. And lastly, again, we need to find that balance between security and protecting our privacy and civil liberties. You can't have all of it. We need to find the balance between the two. So strategy. I mentioned in this cybersecurity framework, that's a great first step. It's a great blueprint for or roadmap for critical infrastructure owners to implement best practices in terms of protecting themselves. It allows them to assess their status and where they are in terms of cybersecurity and what they need to do to improve. The government is trying to figure out incentives to make businesses and critical infrastructure owners implement the cybersecurity framework, and there's a lot of good thoughts out there on how to do that, but we still need more work on that. Legislation. There have been numerous attempts already to pass legislation on this issue, but so far all these attempts have failed, mainly due to the privacy issues. The interested groups, privacy and civil liberty groups, they have criticized some of this legislation in terms of being too vague and overly broad, and we don't necessarily have the sought-after privacy protections that we want. Not only that, the legislation so far has kind of focused on the information sharing aspect of cybersecurity, which is obviously critical, but there are so many other parts of it that need to be implemented, like good training and exercising in terms of cybersecurity, implementing actual best practices. Information sharing alone about what the threats are and what we're seeing that's out there is not enough. Good employee training in terms of government agencies, private organizations, anybody, personal benefit. That is really the key. Knowing what to do, practicing good cyber hygiene will go a long way in terms of increasing our cybersecurity.